Our top story this morning, the Prime Minister set to veto any proposal to enshrine a voice for Indigenous Australians in the Constitution, emphasising divisions over how constitutional recognition could be achieved.
We'll go live now to political reporter James Doherty. James, what is Scott Morrison's position?
Scott Morrison would prefer an Indigenous body bringing together a number of other Indigenous bodies around the country, perhaps in legislation rather than a voice enshrined in the Constitution. This was what the Uluru Statement from the Heart called for in 2017, a voice enshrined in the Constitution to give Indigenous people a voice in Parliament. There are concerns from some within the government, including Scott Morrison, that any voice enshrined in the Constitution would amount to potentially a third chamber of Parliament. And this is where divisions are beginning to emerge in the push for Indigenous recognition, with Ken Wyatt moving towards a consensus proposal for a referendum within 3 years.
We're not in favour of a third chamber or a separate voice. We've got a very strong democracy. We want to see more Indigenous people in the Parliament. It's great that Ken Wyatt is the first Indigenous Affairs Minister, and I think he's got a process that's underway. Let him conduct the consultation and then we'll make an announcement about the next step.
This is spin in order to argue against the Uluru Statement from the Heart. What it simply said was that there's a need for an Indigenous voice to Parliament without any power to determine legislation. It's not a third chamber. It simply says that where issues affect First Nations people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, they should be consulted. It's as simple as that. It's about respect.
So we now are seeing the divisions from the government and the Labor Party emphasised over how to achieve constitutional recognition and that voice, whether it's enshrined in the Constitution, as Labor is calling for, or maintained through legislation, as Ken Wyatt has suggested. It's clear that this conversation isn't over, and there's a very long way to go until we do reach that consensus proposal on how Indigenous recognition could be achieved. Annalise and Kieran.